Hello, everyone. Welcome, bienvenue to this gathering convened by the National Trust called Using Municipal Elections to Get Heritage on the Radar. We'll just give it a few minutes for people to join in. And in the meantime, why don't you say hello in the chat? Let us know where you're participating from today and if any organization you're representing. My name is Natalie Bull. I'm here leading this session with my colleague Chris Wiebe from the National Trust. And I'd like to start by acknowledging the Indigenous peoples of all of the lands that all of us participating today are working and living on. I'm actually in New Brunswick on the traditional unceded territory of the Wolastoqiyik people, here very close to the banks of the river they call the Wolastoq. But we know that all of you are participating from various parts of the country, and we really encourage you to join us in reflecting on the histories, languages, and culture of First Nations, Métis, and Inuit communities whose presence continues to enrich our shared heritage. Just a word about these gatherings, that they're more working session than webinar. They're sort of open, goal-oriented opportunities for exchange among many people in the sector across the country. Sometimes we use them for information gathering or just to bring people together around a hot topic. And today's topic was inspired by interesting work that we were seeing by our colleagues in various parts of the country to participate and influence decision-making as part of municipal elections. So we're excited to have 5 great panelists who are prepared to share their insights and their experiences in using municipal elections as an opportunity to get heritage on the radar. But we really want everyone on the screen participating to be welcome to make a contribution. So you're welcome to turn your camera on. We probably would encourage you to keep your microphone turned off until you're actually going to be participating in the conversation. You can use the chat to type your comments or questions in, and we'll make sure that they're shared with panelists, and we'll address them if there's time during the course of the session. We're recording today's session, so we will be sharing with you within 24 hours the recording of the whole session. In addition, we'll provide what was written in the chat, so all of that gets captured for posterity. If you want to actually participate with your voice in real time, you can use the reactions button. I see that at the bottom of my screen. There's a raise your hand option there. That would ensure that we would see you. There are so many faces on the screen, we might not see everyone if you're raising your hand. So n'hésitez pas de participer, de poser des questions dans la langue de votre choix. We'll do our best to make sure that people participating in either official language feel comfortable today. Just a few words about the National Trust. These gatherings really are an important part of the work that we do to build the heritage movement. Our work through sessions like this, through our conference, through programs like Launchpad, we work to empower people to use heritage conservation to create livable communities, to reflect the diversity of our country, to tell our country's many stories, to contribute to climate action. So many opportunities we know that heritage conservation can play in our communities. And so this conversation today about elections, I think, is a really interesting opportunity for us to think about how the way that we present heritage conservation and what its values and goals are can connect with a broader public. And on that note, I just wanted to mention a project that I see this conversation today really helping to advance, and that is a project that we call the Heritage Reset. Those of you who participated at our conference earlier this fall would have been involved in many conversations that posed a number of questions to all of us working in this field. And I'll ask Holly to advance to the next slide to just give you a glance at those questions. You can go right ahead to the next one, Holly. So some tough questions that we're asking, really about making sure that the work that we do, the language that we use in heritage, the way that we practice heritage conservation really is aligned with bigger important movements in society. So we had lots of interesting conversations about how heritage conservation can be diverse and inclusive, how it can reflect the diversity of our country, We talked about, questioning the approach that we take to commenting on development proposals versus how that is perceived by people who are focused on climate action, for example. So really, again, I think today's conversation will be an interesting opportunity for us to think about how the public perceives what we are asking for and what we're promoting as heritage advocates. So without further ado, I will turn it over to my colleague, Chris Wiebe, who might say a few more words about today's session and introduce our panelists who have agreed to kick off the conversation today. Merci beaucoup.
Thanks so much, Natalie. Yes, I'm Chris Wiebe, and I'm the Manager of Heritage Policy and Government Relations here at the National Trust. And it's great to have so many people here on the line. This webinar today, actually, this gathering kind of was occasioned by seeing David Ridley and Josh Traptow's kind of work out of Alberta that came out during the election. And I started looking around and also started seeing notes coming in from Yukon and also Quebec and New Brunswick on kind of the heritage file. And it seemed like a great opportunity to look at this space because as we say in the descriptor for the gathering, municipal elections really are a golden opportunity to get heritage conservation issues in front of community residents and also in front of prospective elected officials. So it's great to have a pan-Canadian panel here to look at that, and then also to think about the bigger picture, as Natalie says, of about the heritage reset, which is really about looking inward and looking about how we project ourselves into the world, how we see ourselves fitting into some of the new critical issues that are coming at us, and how we can contribute to solutions in that regard. So, great panel today. We're going to run through them in alphabetical order, except I think we're going to move Margot Shepherd until the end. So today we have Dinu Bumbaru, and he's the Policy Director of Heritage Montreal. Wonderful to have him here. They've just come out of a whole series of elections in Quebec. Then we're going to have Leanne Maitland, and she's the Executive Director of the Yukon Historical and Museums Association up in Whitehorse. And she came out of a whole trifecta of elections this year: Whitehorse, territorial elections in Yukon, and also the federal elections. So she's got a bumper crop of experience, and hopefully we can learn from some of the things that she was involved in there. Then we have David Ridley, and he is the Executive Director of the Edmonton Heritage Council. And Edmonton just had a really exciting election, big turnover, new mayor, the incumbent mayor stepping down. So they've done some really ambitious things, and looking forward to hearing about what the strategies they deployed in the Edmonton election to get heritage on the radar. Then we'll move south down Highway 2 to Calgary with Josh Traptow, who's the Executive Director of Heritage Calgary. And he'll bring us up to speed on the elections that happened in Calgary at the same time as the Edmonton ones, and the strategies deployed there. Then I want to shift back east to Margot Shepherd, and she was just recently, just in the last election in Fredericton, within the last month, was elected councillor there in the city of Fredericton. But she has been involved in the land trust movement in New Brunswick, and has been involved in various forms of advocacy. So here's an advocate who's moving into the political sphere, and it'll be great to see her kind of nascent, her first thoughts on what the transition between those, what kind of communications work and which ones need to be examined a little further. So without further ado, why don't we start with Dinu Bumbaru from Montreal. And Dinu, can you give us a kind of an overview of the things that Heritage Montreal was involved in and some of your reflections on the last election?
Merci Chris, merci Nathalie, bonjour tout le monde. Peut-être un petit mot de contexte avant d'entrer dans l'expérience spécifique des élections qui viennent de se terminer. We just had election last week in Montreal and in Quebec, actually, throughout Quebec on the 7th of November. And tomorrow, for instance, is the taking a vote for the Montreal Council and its borough members. So we're talking about 103 officers just for that city. There's globally, there's 1,100 municipalities in Quebec, plus 23 who are running this election. For comparison, I think there's about 440 in Ontario. So it means that there's a lot of platform or places to intervene. For Heritage Montreal, we've chosen to focus our attention on Montreal and the Greater Montreal area, which comprise of about 80 municipalities. So there's a huge concentration of heritage in there, and a big challenge as well. So we don't, there are different strategies. In our case, we've adopted the idea of looking, of course, at programs from different parties or candidates, sort of meeting with them when they wish. And there was a situation in the current election that I'll relate if I have time. And we also participate in developing questions that other organizations in the fields of environment, culture, tourism, urban development might rise in their own event. Because of the nature of the Montreal, the city of Montreal, I mean, which carries a budget of over $6 billion, you can imagine that it is a quasi-governmental election, and there are public debates organized with candidates for the office of mayor and opportunity. But Heritage Montreal doesn't organize a specific debate on heritage. We'd rather integrate heritage in economy and social development and environment, and mostly in cultural development for the city. And we also have a habit since the 1990s to issue to put candidates and parties and groups on notice of what's likely to happen in their land or on their plate for the next mandate. These are 4-year mandates, and we'd rather put energy on identifying what are the unavoidable issues that they'll have to face and get them ready for it, than to try to get them to give us some vague promises during election. We found out that it's more efficient like that. And we always go through a letter. For instance, in that case, we had a letter published in Le Devoir, which is a newspaper here. Le patrimoine a besoin de résultats concrets was the title that the paper chose. Heritage requires concrete results. So it's in the, we didn't steal this one from this enlightened leader of Greta Thunberg, but somehow it's part of that same family. That's very nice to have all these programs using heritage building for their layout and background, the backdrop for so many speeches and so on, but we'd like to have some results. So gradually in the text that we've published, we've introduced a number of proposals and set up priorities. To be heard, you have to build up. It's not during the election that you exist. We've been existing since almost 50 years, and we use that weight to have the right to speak, but not necessarily to finger point individual case alone, but also issues of policy and organizing governance for better heritage work. We had in this year, we had a specific collaboration with Culture Montréal, which is the regional Culture Council, which is a structure throughout the various regions of Quebec. And Culture Montreal published a platform. They do it systematically for every 3 tiers of government. When their election, there is a cultural platform. What are they going to give? So in this year, there are 40 proposals and recommendations to all parties, and a number of them relate specifically to heritage, which we have developed jointly beforehand. And they were, these proposals led to question in the debate with candidate to the mayor, for instance, on creating a specific department on heritage rather than have heritage a subsidiary of the planning department. Because we feel, there's a hierarchy in the city, and usually the politicians don't like the civil society to get involved in shaping up the bureaucracies. But after a while, we realized that there is an issue of that nature, and we'd rather put it on the table than under the carpet. We've also had that open letter that was published before the election. It's not there to influence vote. It's just to put, as I said, put parties, candidates on notice that we will be there to work with them if they understand, or to raise the issue in the public if it becomes a crisis. We'd rather not have it turn into a crisis, but uncared matter usually turn into that if they're not properly attended. And this year's we identified 4 priorities. One is the service to the owner rather than focus on his individual historical building. We said the owner is a crowd that requires a specific attention and support from the city of Montreal, but more broadly speaking from municipalities. There was an issue about the governance, this issue of having a strong enough presence of heritage within the city governance and civil service and so on. The updating of the city master plan is coming up, so where insist that heritage be in there, as well as in the ecological or transition strategies. Right now, we're going towards a situation where we'll have a clash between heritage and the climate change and ecological strategy. So we'd rather work upstream to have prevention, and because these are topics that can work very well together if they're discussed earlier enough. And the issue of reinforcing collaboration to develop a common vision. So it was at different level. The letter introduced also a number of individual cases because the readers are not policy strategists, they are citizens, and you have to incarner les enjeux in real cases. So whether it's an abandoned church in a neighborhood, it's a series of old buildings, the loss of craftsmanship in many places, these are issues that we use in shaping up that letter. The next step will be to ask for a meeting with the mayor and work on her promise to us that every year we will have a public online monitoring exercise, Heritage Montreal and the Mayor of Montreal, to report to the public on the progress made. So we have to send letters, the same thing we do for the federal and so on. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Dean. A multifaceted approach there, and really interesting, and hopefully we can circle back to with this on the idea of collaborating with other actors working in a similar space like that culture Montreal, and then also the idea of grafting heritage conversations, not just exerting and inserting and projecting heritage ideas into the public sphere, but also grafting onto other challenges around affordable housing and economic development, etc. Okay, thanks so much. Now, skipping a couple thousand kilometers to the north, I want to go off to Leanne Maitland up in Whitehorse. And Leanne, do you want to share with us some of your experiences with your many elections this year?
Yeah, so just first, for those of you who don't know my organization, the Yukon Historical Museums Association, we're a territorial incorporated nonprofit and a federally registered charity. And our offices are in Whitehorse, which is located on the traditional territory of Kwanlundan First Nation and Ta'ang Council, and that's where I'm coming to this meeting today. And our mission is to strengthen heritage in the Yukon through leadership, advocacy, and education. So as you can guess, since advocacy is one of our primary activities, 2021 has been quite a year for us. As Chris mentioned, we did have 3 elections. We had a territorial election in April, of course, the federal election in September, and then municipal and local area council elections in October. So we did undertake advocacy for all of the elections. But because there was only a month between the federal election and the municipal elections, we did have limited time to work on our advocacy strategy. And it was for all of the municipalities and the unincorporated communities that have local area councils. But we focused on Whitehorse. We do have a territorial mandate, but first of all, our offices are located in Whitehorse, so we are able to see day to day more of the issues that are going on. But also it's growing and developing extremely rapidly, which of course can have a huge impact on heritage. So by 2040, the city is estimating that we'll have a population of 40,700. We have just over 33,000 now. So that's quite a growth. And there are lots of questions about how we're going to accommodate that growth. So the strategy that we took for the municipal election was really informed by some other municipal advocacy work we've been undertaking in the last year or so. And we had written to mayor and council about a few issues, and we had meetings with city staff. And during those meetings, we actually got some really good information and advice on how decisions were being made and how we could get issues before council. And two things that we kept running into were the city has a heritage management plan, but it's from 1999 and it's theoretically still in effect. But as far as we can tell, it really hasn't been for quite a while. As well, we also have a heritage registry, but it was last comprehensively updated in 2011. And with all the development that's going on, that means that there are buildings that should probably be on that registry now that aren't. And so they're not given due consideration for what their heritage value might be before there are permits issued for development and demolition. And as you can imagine, with the growth levels of the city and the fact that they have chosen densification as the primary strategy for accommodating that growth, it means that we are seeing the loss of a lot of heritage buildings. So, so we really wanted to address those issues in our advocacy. There's also been other issues that have come up multiple times over the last few years. We don't just focus on built heritage. Our mandate is very wide. So we also do museums and stuff as well. And so there were some issues around those. And we thought that this was a good opportunity to get these issues in front of new faces. So our outgoing mayor had been in the position for 9 years. He won 3 back-to-back terms. And we've had a lot of repeat councillors on the last few councils. But in this election, there were 3 mayoral candidates. 2 were councillors on the former council. 1 was totally new to municipal politics. And we had 17 councillor candidates for 6 positions. And out of those, only 2 were prior councillors from the previous council. And then there was 1 other candidate who had been on council years before. Everybody else was new. So this was a lot of new faces, new people that we could draw attention to these issues. So if Holly could pull up my slide now. So overall, what we did was pretty simple. Like I said, we didn't have a ton of time to really prepare a more nuanced strategy. But essentially, we developed a series of 5 sort of high-level questions that related to heritage and the city's role in conserving it and sharing it. And then we sent it out to all the candidates for responses. So for example, rather than getting into nitty-gritty of a heritage management plan and asking questions about specific parts, we try to focus it on broad, just more broadly the heritage management plan and reestablishing the Heritage Advisory Committee. And the idea is that if the heritage management plan can be updated, that's an opportunity to have conversations about a broad range of topics, like, for example, heritage's role in climate change. And the city of Whitehorse has declared a climate emergency, so that's something that's really key. And so yeah, we tried to keep our questions broad. And so the first questions, obviously, just to sort of get a sense of how the candidates viewed heritage. The second 2 are more directed towards built heritage, and then the 4th and 5th are more towards museums. So we shared the questions with all of the candidates. I did attend an all candidates, mayoral candidates forum that was hosted by a local nonprofit group that was directed towards nonprofits. And I shared the question about the heritage management plan there. So we got a response from the mayoral candidates. I also went to one for all the councillor candidates, but 17 candidates and only an hour. There wasn't any time to address any of our questions. So we did get responses from 9 of the 17 councillor candidates, and I believe that was 5 out of the 6 that actually got elected. So that's excellent. And we got responses from all the mayoral candidates for the question that I submitted during the forum. Of course, we did send them the other questions, but they didn't have time to respond. And it was a very quick turnaround. It wasn't just that. So yeah, sorry, I see that I'm at 5 minutes. So, but we're now focusing on, setting up meetings and continuing the discussion. So.
Thanks a lot, Leanne. No, and I think it's also interesting because you bring up an excellent point around just the horsepower that's needed to keep in touch with various councillors and bring them up to speed. That's another challenge for organizations with limited capacity. I know that places like New Westminster, BC, they have a regular kind of intake of education and training of new councillors in the heritage sphere to some extent, and I know other places do as well, but we can maybe unpack that a little later. I want to shift now, thank you, a little bit further south to David Ridley in Edmonton, and he's the executive director there at the Edmonton Heritage Council. David, you guys undertook some quite ambitious, a bit more ambitious than than some of the other years. Do you want to talk about your involvements this year?
Yeah, thanks, Chris, and thanks for the introduction. Thanks, everybody, for being here. Yeah, just a little further south than Whitehorse, but not that much, perhaps. Yeah, so this was a really interesting year for us. Now, in the 2017 election, civic elections every 4 years, we actually did a survey, but this year, part of our work was to, it was a partnership with the Edmonton Historical Board, which is actually a city council appointed advisory board. As an organization, we are ourselves, the Edmonton Heritage Council. We have much more latitude for advocacy in this space. We have a funding agreement with the city of Edmonton. We are a grantor. But we decided in this case instead to do something that was very much more broadly educational and not sort of push on the survey. I'm not sure we wouldn't go back to that in the future, but it seemed right for the time we had. I think it was also with the federal election, you know, the election space felt pretty crowded. So we decided to go this way. And the other issue is that there was a major transition in Edmonton City Council. So including the mayor, there's 13 members of council, 12 councillors and the mayor. And as it turned out, there were 8 new councillors as well as a new mayor, although he had previously served as a city councillor. And so we kind of moved towards, okay, let's be educational about this, and also for voters as well. So what's up here on the screen is just, this is actually from the brief. So I know that's either has been provided or will be provided. So you'll have access to this. So there's how we position it up front. You know, it's intended for raising awareness of key issues. The other part of this is the Edmonton Historical Board, our partner in this. They were like, well, they don't really want to be seen to be politicking either as an advisory council an advisory committee to city council. So we took this approach. And so that's just the cover sheet. Maybe we can go to the next slide and I'll just talk about this. So with this educational approach, we decided, okay, well, let's identify some key issues. There's lots of issues. And so there's 3 there. You know, the ongoing loss and risk of significant Edmonton historic resources, some listing there. We wanted to make sure that we spoke as we could confidently with the Indigenous community. So we mentioned that as a key issue, the city's Indigenous cultural heritage. And this also included an initiative that, you know, now has actually been confirmed. So not because of us putting it into the election space, but that there's a go-ahead on the construction of an Indigenous ceremony and cultural site in Edmonton. And then I think probably the key thing was us leaning into a civic program, the Historic Resources Management Program, and identifying that it's time for its review. It's time for a review of the resources, its approach, the staffing and that. So we those are the 3 things that we rose or that we wanted to sort of pull up into some public view. And then we included other things like the FAQs you can see at the bottom, just as informational. That's what we are trying to do. Let me go to the next slide just quickly. Thanks. No time spent on this, but because of the educational nature of this, we wanted to give candidates and citizens some view of, you know, how you could view Edmonton's heritage ecology. Now, this is you know, quite conceptual. It touches on really the city organizations as well as some of the other levels of government, including Indigenous and First Nations and Métis governance in the area. So again, educational in this case. I will say, you can see out on the right hand, Connections and Exchanges 10-year Arts and Heritage Plan. We are one of the lead partners in that plan. That plan is adopted by City Council, and then they fund us to help carry that plan out with our colleagues, the Edmonton Arts Council. I'll also say that Edmonton City Plan is something that we're very aware of. So in short, the strategic goals there are healthy city, urban places, economic prosperity, and climate resiliency. And so we tend to position our discussions with city councillors, which we'll have now going after the election, around those strategic aims. Next slide. I think I'm just about out of time here. And then this is just a quick look at how we did heritage by the ward. By the way, Edmonton's wards have been renamed with Indigenous names. And so it was really, all those dots represent places on the municipal inventory. And then the other items are really quite subjective, just things that we think are of interest, and also noting what's on the inventory and what's actually designated and protected. And then I think my last slide, here's an example of a ward where there's less presence, you can see by the number of dots, but we really did want to make attempts to show that the interest in heritage is throughout the city. And so there are certainly some wards where it's a little tougher to pull up things, but we're able to do it. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that inventories haven't been done. So that's our approach on this. Thanks.
That's exciting approach, David. Thank you for walking us through that. And I think, kind of revealing the hidden connections in the footprint in different wards, city wards, is important. And I know others have done that at the federal level and provincial levels, but it's great to see that happening in Edmonton too. Very ambitious enterprise there. So shifting again down to Calgary, I want to throw it over to Josh Traptow, and I guess there was a civic election there as well. And Josh, can you walk us through Heritage Calgary's approach this year?
Absolutely. Thanks, Chris. As Chris said, my name is Josh Traptow. I'm the Executive Director of Heritage Calgary, and I'm joining you today from the traditional territories of the people of the Treaty 7 region in Southern Alberta, and that the city of Calgary is also home to the Métis Nation of Alberta Region 3. All of Alberta had municipal elections, and so in Calgary in particular, we had a significant turnover on our council. Holly, you can go to the next slide, please. There was actually 10 open seats on our council, including the mayor's race or mayor's chair. 27 candidates ran for mayor, 100 people ran for councillor, and we sent information packages to all of the candidates prior to our survey. This was the second year that we had done our candidate survey and had found it quite helpful, especially for those candidates that were then elected. It then gave us a really good baseline as to what their level knowledge and understanding of heritage is when we're then going to meet with them. Heritage Calgary is a civic partner of the city of Calgary, so one of our core mandates is to advise City Council on heritage related matters, and so we often are meeting with the mayor's office and councillors on various items. Holly, you can go to the next slide. So within that, we only received 34 responses, but within that, 6 of the 15 members of council took part in our survey, and we met with another 3 of them. So overall, we had touch points with a majority of the new council, either through one-on-one meetings or through our survey. All of the front-runner top 6 candidates for mayor took part in our survey. We had 20 one-on-one meetings with various candidates at either councillor or the mayoral. And when we asked them what their favorite historic resource was, a majority of them answered parks or green spaces, which we thought was interesting. And we asked them kind of 6 questions that ranged from, what do they know about heritage in Calgary, to their favorite heritage resource, to will they support the proposed residential tax credit if they are elected. We've been doing a lot of work around heritage policies in Calgary, both around financial incentives and planning tools. And so we wanted to gauge what this new council was going to support as administration continued to work on the implementation of these potential tax credits. For the residential tax credit, it would be any residential site that's designated as a municipal heritage resource would be eligible for up to a 75% tax credit every year for 15 years to a maximum of $50,000. So that's quite an incentive for properties that aren't interested in the grant program because they don't need to use it or anything like that. All in all, of our 15-member council, we had 9 new members of council, 3 incumbents, and 2 incumbents actually lost, and we had 2 returning members of council. two who retired in the 2017 election. One ran for mayor and one chose not to run again. And then our mayor was an incumbent councillor. So overall, this was largely the largest change that we have seen on our city council since post-World War II. And so we're viewing it as an opportunity to work with this new council. We've put together welcome packages with ward-specific information. We think it's important for them to see the breakdown of their wards. Obviously, each ward has different amounts of heritage. Heritage that is perhaps postmodern or expressionist from the 1950s, or in some of our more inner city wards, obviously heritage that dates back to the founding of Calgary in the late 1800s to the 1900s when it was settled. That's been kind of our approach. And so now it's really building those relationships with the new council and their staff and making sure that they have the support that they need to make the decisions around heritage as they move forward on budget deliberations. And we'll see what happens from there. So that's what happened in Calgary. All of our survey responses are available on our website if people are interested in seeing the questions that we asked.
Thanks so much, Josh. That's really interesting because I think that the communications tools that you created for those counselors can also be used double duty for residents alike. And it's also nice to see that those ambitious, trying to use the election to advance those ambitious policy measures that need to be ratified by council now and brought forward. So that's another important element as well. We're going to want to be talking about best practices and trying to coming out of it. One of the ideas behind this gathering is to test this idea of, do we need a dossier of best practices like some of these things that have been field tested by organizations around Canada, and to share that. We can talk about that a little later. But thank you, Josh. Okay, on to Margot Shepherd over in New Brunswick. And Margot is changing her hats, and then she's becoming a counselor there, where she's assumed that role. Margot, do you want to talk a little bit about the election and heritage in Fredericton? And then we can open it up to broader discussion.
I absolutely do. Thank you, Chris. So my name's Margot, and I am a city councillor in the city of Fredericton, New Brunswick. I've also been a trustee of the Fredericton Heritage Trust, which is a venerable 50-year-old NGO institution in this city. And I'm currently on my third term as a trustee. So my involvement with Heritage has spanned 25 years as a trustee, supporter, and agitator, trying to save heritage in this natural and built heritage in this beautiful town. So I'm going to briefly profile a heritage project that propelled me from outside agitator to city councillor in 2021. A few years ago, a plan was announced to revitalize, quote unquote, a space that is the heart of our city, known as Officer Square. And Holly, if you could please put up the first slide. And this is a space that's been used for hundreds of years as gathering spot, first for the Wolastoqiyik people, then for early Acadian settlers, and then the British military. And more contemporary uses have included theater, concerts, festivals, and skating in the winter. The plan was and remains highly controversial, and for very valid reasons. It's what really solidified in my mind the idea of running for municipal council in last spring's election. That and my sense that the city wasn't doing enough to address climate change. So interestingly enough, in my door-to-door campaign, fully masked, of course, heritage, and particularly this one project, Officer Square, was the #1 concern that I heard from residents. And I live in a region of the city that's the furthest away that you can get from this downtown landmark. Conserving heritage was on my online platform and in my brochure. And for a loyalist town with architecture dating from the 1700s, our ability and seeming willingness as a city to conserve these places for future generations is highly inadequate. So second to heritage, affordable housing and the homeless were mentioned numerous times at the door. Fredericton has had homeless issues and rents. House prices are soaring, similar to cities all across Canada. Fortunately, I was able to knit together these issues, and climate change, which is top of mind for me, really with conserving heritage in the city. So during the campaign, I talked about how an existing building is the greenest building, the idea of embedded carbon, which is rarely, well, in new construction is huge and it's rarely accounted for. I talked that renovated buildings save energy and resources, not to mention space in the landfill site. I talked about how heritage buildings are economic drivers for tourism. And in Fredericton, we have a full-time sports tourism coordinator, and we spend $800,000 maintaining our sports fields every year, but we allocate only 1/4 of one full-time equivalent staff position, if that, to heritage. So I also talked about retrofitting heritage buildings for affordable housing and how that can attract funding for federal programs, achieving heritage, climate, and housing objectives all in one. Then I got elected and I went through my first budget cycle, which is just coming to an end next week. And while I found it better to be on the inside than on the outside, when it comes to influencing things that matter to me, it's still challenging. So there's lots of competing priorities, of course, and staff who are overworked yet seem unable to accept or seek additional resources for heritage. I understand it, but I don't accept it. And I will keep pushing and trying to bring my colleagues who aren't as concerned with heritage along with me to allocate more resources and decide with heritage when the alternative is destruction or replacement. Sadly, circling back to Officer Square, second slide, please, Holly. Last week, my council voted 8-4 to proceed with the intensive revitalization plans. The vote split along seniority lines, basically with almost all new councillors, 4 out of 5, voting to revisit public consultation and delay the vote, while the returning ones just wanted to get things done. And again, circling back to my role as a trustee in the charitable Fredericton Heritage Trust, last January, I moved that a subcommittee be struck to investigate taking on more of the functions of a city civic trust, actual hands-on, if needed, conservation of historic assets. We have never done that before. Well, that's not true, but it's been minimal in terms of recent activity. So we perceived that the municipal realm was enthralled with new development, not so keen on heritage. We saw the complementarity of affordable housing, energy efficiency, upgrades, and heritage. We saw the future absolutely untenable possibility of losing some of our iconic buildings in our downtown. And the conclusion we reached was that we should step up. And to that end, the trust just hired our first executive director. She started last week. I think she's on the call today. Hi, Anthea. So just to conclude, Fredericton Heritage Trust saved our city hall by one vote on council 50 years ago. And Holly, could you please show the third slide? I'll just say that I believe that working both inside and outside this venerable building, which I hope you can see, more of Fredericton's heritage will be saved for the future. So thanks.
Thanks so much, Margot. And exciting to see that transition and yeah, the realities of the budget cycle, and also putting it in the context of the things that are valued within municipalities, are currently valued and that need to be raised up. So this is exciting to have you in that role. Natalie, do you have a question that you're seeing from the chats come in, or?
I don't see any questions in the chat yet, but thanks so much to all the panelists. And I might just start with Margot. I just think it's so exciting, Margot, to see your transition from advocate on the outside to counselor on the inside. And I'm wondering if you've already had any insights about the way that we use language as heritage advocates, or the way that we present our case that we can learn from.
I think there's a perception in Fredericton, or there has been, that the heritage advocates are always against things, and we're the downers, you know, we're never being positive, and that comes from some comments made by city councilors, the old city council, and then that were reported on verbatim in the local press, and the local press can be that way sometimes. But yeah, so I think you know, it's nice to be for something, to have your act sufficiently together that you can be a strong proponent of good things that meet a number of different objectives. And that's kind of, I hope, where we're heading with the Fredericton Heritage Trust.
Mhm. I wanted to mention too, Margot, something that I saw from coming out of the Fredericton Heritage Trust, a kind of very clear-eyed summary of the challenges facing the municipality that I think many municipalities could learn from. Like we often kind of jump into what our advocacy asks are without always having a clear, being able to present a clear picture of what the local challenges are.
Natalie, I'm just seeing a question coming in, a hand raised from Anthea Plummer here. Anthea, do you want to dive in and just give your question and also just give a brief introduction to yourself?
Thank you. Yes, I'm Anthea, and I am the new executive director for the Fredericton Heritage Trust, which Margot made reference to. I'm really happy to be in on this Zoom meeting today, and I noticed at the beginning and throughout, there was a lot around collaborations or allyship, a lot of looking at how people can look for that connecting factor that might raise heritage profile. And that is very interesting to me, and what I'm hoping that we can do in Fredericton going forward. One of the pieces, of course, being, I think it was you actually that mentioned how environment being one, housing maybe another, and then there's art and culture. So there are different facets by which we might make partnerships. I noticed that in Fredericton, a big thing that we have in City Council seems to be a sponsorship for leisure. We seem to be a city that has no problem investing in leisure, but some of the other things tend to be a little harder sell for the majority of City Council. So leisure is another one that I might slide in there, even if it's not top on our list of how can we put all of this together in a way that taps into some of those leisure funds and the seemingly abundant support that might be there for leisure activities, because sometimes leisure activities do bring in some money if it's sports and things like that. So I'm not sure how that can really play out at the ground level, but I thought I would put that out there and see what people think and if they've been tapping into that area in their own cities.
You know,
Okay, well, oh, Josh, do you want to dive in here?
yeah, I think it's all about starting to build those relationships and really showing council that your citizens care about heritage. And I think that's been the biggest change in Calgary is in the last 10 years that I've been involved in heritage in one capacity or another. People actually are starting to care about heritage, even, you know, before buildings are torn down. We just went through a large planning exercise in Calgary called the Guidebook for Great Communities, and it's had various iterations. But I think it's all about starting to build those relationships and reaching out to community associations and other heritage organizations to really start to build up those networks and those relationships so that you're able to show to council that citizens want those things. Because as soon as council see that their citizens want that, they're then, at least in Calgary, they seem to be a little bit more favorable of spending money on heritage or making those kind of investments.
Question for just diving in here, just realizing we're running short on time. Nancy Oakley, there's a bunch of questions coming in the chat. Nancy Oakley is asking, and I'm going to throw this out to the other guests and panelists here, around the interface between those working in administration, like heritage planners and others, and elected officials, and how they're part of that whole kind of outreach that happens at these kind of election moments as well. Does somebody want to dive in on that? to talk about the connections there. David, you want to go? You want to go for it?
Oh, just a quick thing. So I did put a quick note in the chat. You know, the heritage planners are within the larger planning and urban forum, but you know, I think they've historically felt under siege. They're small. They're seen as you know, just as Margot expressed, you know, not wanting to change or advancing, doing work on something that is about, you know, halting progress, if you like. But we're making inroads because there's been a larger sort of with areas of the city like River Crossing, where those planning moves are increasingly built on the importance of heritage. May not be exactly precisely on built heritage, but it's really how do you make a better city and a livable city. And then the other thing I mentioned is we're really well connected to citizen and public services because we do so much work in this space and other really on inclusion and belonging and building, you know, sort of a welcoming city. So that's pretty important for us. So we have good contacts in there. You know, overall, I wish our contacts were just stronger with strategic development in the city, that those were I think properly partners with that work.
I'm also
had a
wondering,
question.
oh, go ahead, Natalie.
Well, there was a question in the chat wanting to drill down a bit more into surveys. Maybe, I don't know if it was Josh, you might want to just say a few words about the kinds of questions, what you're using those surveys to get at.
Yeah, so the surveys kind of starting with a baseline as to, you know, what do they know about heritage in Calgary? And then, and that's why we kind of sent out that briefing document to candidates first with kind of everything you need to know about heritage, and then asking them, you know, is there anything else that you've thought of that we haven't talked about? And then kind of drilling down onto some of those more specific policy questions. And most of our questions were allowing them to give, you know, short answers if they wanted, because I mean, any candidate that's running for office is getting a gazillion amount of surveys, and you want to make it as easy as possible for them to respond. So a lot of ours had a rating scale, you know, from 1 to 5, where would you place the importance of X when it comes to that heritage policy, and then allowing them to expand on their answer if they chose to. But really trying to make it as easy as possible for them to answer was something that we've kind of discovered over the last couple of elections when we've done these types of surveys.
Great, thanks, Josh.
Interesting question here from Ken Johnson, and I think I can throw it open to Leanne and David on this one, perhaps, and maybe some others. But this idea of, has anyone experienced how to transcend defining what heritage to preserve, i.e. beyond the historic buildings, to include First Nations, etc.? And I think, David, with your ward by ward kind of map there, you were trying to explode those kind of go-to ideas around what is heritage. Is it the fancy houses? Is it, you know, certain kind of bank buildings, and bringing it to, you know, cultural practices, etc. I guess are these election kind of moments a chance to expand people's horizons in terms of explode those stereotypes about what is heritage and what isn't, and really project a different kind of you know, forward-facing look of heritage into the public sphere? So I don't know if you want to go with that, David or Leanne.
I mean, my quick comment is, yes, you want to do that. I mean, you know, as Josh said, people don't have much time and attention. So it's really to at least, you know, bookmark the idea in that. But, you know, I'd equally like to see in terms of built heritage, and Edmonton's, I would say, is, you know, struggles in this. But what is the built heritage that is related to the Indigenous community? You know, I mean, for us, to some degree, it's easy in a place where there's, you know, Douglas Cardinal architecture in different places, but there's things that are more mundane where important organizations and important moments in Indigenous response have happened. But we really weren't working ahead on that very much. I think we should.
I don't know, Leanne, did you have something to say there too, or maybe?
Yeah, I mean, we do have a sort of more unique situation in the Yukon, given that the majority of the First Nations here do have umbrella final agreements with the government. But certainly, I mean, even in our Heritage Management Plan, which is from 1999, it does make reference to First Nations history. It's a tiny little paragraph and doesn't say much aside from, yes, there were Tonquetchin Council and Kwantlen First Nation were here. And certainly, you know, there is a duty to consult and involve them, and they are very involved. And, you know, if there's going to be a Heritage Management Plan revamp, there'll definitely be involvement there. And we would certainly be looking for it to be a lot broader in its scope. I mean, obviously, there is built heritage, there's museums, and there's also the cultural center. But, you know, that First Nations history is really woven throughout. And so that would certainly need to be included in that. And Kwantlen First Nation and Tonquetchin Council would continue to be partners in that. And they really also take the lead on their own heritage as well. So definitely something where it's not necessarily always written in the heritage legislation, but it's elsewhere, but it needs to be more explicit and incorporated into that. And they would definitely be involved in any process for updating that, for sure.
Yeah, I know. I mean, elections, and there's so many eyeballs on things, and people are awake and aware. It's a great moment to kind of break through those kind of preconceived notions. Natalie, did you want to jump in? I'm just going to say something. I want to throw it out. Would it be useful to have, that was one of the ideas earlier, was to bring together sort of a toolkit around elections and strategies, bringing together some of these examples around the country, and, you know, opportunities for piggybacking on other things happening during elections. Would people find that of use? Do you want to create something that's going to just sit around on someone's shelf? But anyway, that's another thing that, if you want to respond in the chat, that would be great too. Natalie?
I might just jump in. There was an interesting comment by Terry Ledger in the chat about heritage advocates, or heritage can be used as part of a political agenda. We had some sessions at the conference where, you know, talked about the weaponization of heritage, people using heritage as a way to stop projects that might not necessarily be reflective of the values of most people in heritage. So bringing us back to that idea of being clear about our values in the sector reminds me again of the Heritage Reset project that I mentioned at the beginning, where we really do need to do some work in presenting a unified and clear front about what heritage conservation really is about. Margot, you mentioned, you know, the importance of knitting together bigger issues with heritage conservation, and that's also part of this reset project. And I should say it's a pretty big $400,000 initiative over a couple of years that includes some investment in making the case. So I could see through all of your work, all of us in our corners are doing that work to try and express the values of heritage and the benefits of heritage in many different ways. So we're hoping that through this project, with collaboration of people like you, we can really pull that together in a way that becomes a resource for others to use. And there's also public polling to get a better sense of what the public thinks about heritage, and, you know, how do we engage with a broader public and be more in aligned with what citizens and voters care about. And then culminating in a public awareness campaign where we develop some messaging that, again, we can all use to do a better job of connecting with elected officials and voters and funders and others in the community. So I encourage you all, would be happy to talk to any of you more about that project. Some of our partners are here on this call with us, and we'll be sharing it out through our networks. So stay tuned. And I think we might have to start wrapping it up at this point. Yep. I did just want to ask Chris to mention the next gathering on our schedule coming up on COP26. Chris?
Yeah, it's at December 8th. It's on the Wednesday at 12 noon Eastern again. And it's going to be with some people that were actually there from Historic Scotland and from California, and also from Mark Brandt here in Canada, talking about their experiences at COP28 in Glasgow and how we take built heritage and the heritage message to the next level on the climate action front. So would like to see you there. I know it's going to be exciting and I'll have great things to report. A couple of them are actually taking holidays because to recuperate. So they should be fresh when they come on December 8th.
Great, thanks, Chris. Just some information here on the screen about Regeneration Works, the portal that the National Trust uses to share out information and get the word out about gatherings and webinars that we have coming up. Tomorrow we'll send you the recording of this session along with the chat and some other useful links. Encourage you to stay involved, and just want to thank our panelists again. There were comments in the chat about we need to do a part 2, so this may be a continuing conversation, but so great to hear from all of you and to see those comments in the chat. Thanks for participating. Thanks so much to my colleague Chris and to Holly and Nassim in the background for making it run. Merci beaucoup. Bonjour, à la prochaine.